So John Stuart Mill, like I put out here on the board, in his essay Utilitarianism, he is the second generation utilitarian par excellence. His dad was a utilitarian, a friend of Bentham's. Mill was brought up with the philosophy, and by the time that Mill was writing, there was a lot of objections to this moral theory. And a good part of the first part of utilitarianism is just trying to address those and identify those explicitly. While he's doing that, and this is, you'll often see this in philosophy, he ends up adding some new things, making some new movements. And we're really interested in one of these in particular, which is going to tie in with the tasting and talk about cultivation of palate and all that stuff. But first, let's think about this. So he's addressing criticisms of Bentham's utilitarian moral theory that people from other perspectives are making. And I didn't put all of them on the board here. I just put a few of them. These are some of the most interesting ones. One of the ones that he talks about is this notion, and I think some of you, any of those of you who are doing design work would see it this way. Utility means not pleasurable. Oftentimes when we say utilitarian, we mean that something is just serviceable. So, my OtterBox for my iPhone right here is very utilitarian compared to some of the fancier, more aesthetically pleasing cases that you guys have for your phones, right? What is the purpose of this? It's not to look good, right? What is this for?
Protection.
Yeah, just protection. I mean, this is the most solid thing that you can get. And why do I have it? Because I'm very klutzy, and I would otherwise destroy my iPhone if I didn't have the sort of thing that truck can run over, which they can do. Some guys that I knew actually did an experiment with it. Mill says that's actually a mistaken understanding of utilitarianism. Oftentimes we take the utilitarian approach as getting rid of all the possible ornaments, not making things entertaining. Mill would say, no, you miss the point if you said that, because utilitarianism is about what? Pain and pleasure. So the more pleasurable you can make something, the better it is. So, if again, to use my phone, if my phone could look a little nicer, it would have greater utility. Utility is not opposed to pleasure. Utility is what leads to pleasure. So that's an easy enough to get it, take care of a mistake. Another problem that people brought up is they said, well, it's not really practical to aim at happiness for all people or most people. And this is an objection that had a lot of traction back then, but probably has less traction now. Our sentiments when it comes to this are probably, in many respects, reverse to the climate that Mill was writing and arguing in. The basic idea was, well, great, so you're going to aim at making people's lives happier. Greater balance of pleasure in their lives. Most people got to work for a living, though. And what was work like back in the 18th, or the 17th, the 19th century? What do you remember from your history classes? What was work like at the beginning of the industrial age? For most people. Yeah.
Before the transition, people would be outside working like cotton or just in the fields, and then start moving towards more urban environment.
Yeah, so, and he's in England too, so they're not growing cotton, but they're doing other agricultural things. They go into these big cities. Big cities had terrible sanitation. They stank most of the time, noisy. You'd go into these factories. What were factories like? Fun places? Send your kids? They would send their kids, right? What were they like? Yeah.
Overcrowded.
Okay, overcrowded. You got people jam-packed in there like sardines. What else? Were they safe? Yeah.
Dangerous.
Yeah, people lose their fingers, their hands, eyes, and there wasn't a lot of, worker compensation arrangements or anything like that. That was up to the employer. If they were a nice guy, they might help you out or help your family out. Otherwise, they'd say, well, you're no longer a worker because you don't have any hands, so see you later. So, in that sort of environment, you could say, well, this is not a very practical point of view, that we should try to make everybody's life happier. You know, we should aim at introducing as much pleasure. Because look, most people just have to work and get by, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. This is the one I'm really interested in. This is the one that ties in with this discussion of food. People said this is a philosophy fit for pigs. This was an objection that's been made. You remember when we were studying Aristippus and Epicurus, Aristippus really was advocating a philosophy in some ways fit for pigs because he was all about physical pleasure, right? And think about, now, you know, take away some of the moral opprobrium and forget the fact that pigs wallow in mud and filth and all that. And think about pigs. They're, you know, pretty smart animals, smarter than your dogs or cats, way smarter than horses, you know. How much can a pig actually appreciate? Some people keep pigs as pets, don't they? Do you guys know anybody who keeps pigs as pets? Yeah. What is its life like?
It lives inside with their heads, trained to go to the bathroom outside.
They're easily trainable. They're smart. And what does a pig like to do all day?
Mostly just sleeps.
I guess they sleep. So we do that, right? What else do they like to do? They enjoy eating. We enjoy eating. What else do we have in common with pigs? We have a lot of things, actually, when you get down to it. Pigs, I imagine the pet pig likes getting, you know, scratched like a dog or cat. We like that sort of thing too, you know. Pay people, you know, to give us massages, you know, or go to the spa and do things, right? We like to lay in the sun. They like to lay in the sun. That's a nice pleasure. Pigs, you know, they desire sex. We desire sex. You know, we could go through the whole thing. The pigs. Let's just drop it down to dogs and cats. The dogs and cats is just all about eating, laying in the sun, or do they have a sense of curiosity? From your experience. Do they get into things? Why do they get into things? Because they enjoy that, right? That's pleasure. Do we do that sort of stuff? Yeah, we're always like, wait, what's around that corner there? That's still at an animal level. So now if we're focusing on these sort of things that we share in common with all the animals, maybe this is, and we're focusing on pleasures and pains, maybe this is a philosophy fit for pigs. You know, you didn't say, you know, fit for camels or, you know, some other lower thing. Epicurus didn't see it that way. What was Epicurus' big contribution? Do you guys remember? As opposed to Aristippus? Aristippus was okay with, like, you know, say going to a prostitute and you know, saying, I just want the pleasure. Let's cut out all the chit-chat. Yeah.
Epicurus believed in like well-calculated pleasures.
Okay, well calculated. So that uses what? How do you calculate?
Thought process.
What's that?
Like thought process.
You have to think about it. Yeah. So, and the mere act of thinking itself can be pleasurable too, right? All of you have experience with that. Maybe not necessarily with ethics class or philosophy, and that's okay. But with your majors, we've talked about this a number of times over the course of the semester. You've picked your major. Hopefully it's something that you're good at, something you actually enjoy doing. You know, you picked accounting. You like accounting, right? Thank goodness for that, because you're going to be doing that for a good, you know, 20 years, if not 40 years after you get out of here. So I hope it's something that you actually like. You know, business, right? You like business, right? No? You should start thinking about whether you're going to do that. Writing, right? You enjoy writing. You enjoy writing too, so maybe you should think about becoming a writer. Or a business writer, right? But you enjoy writing. It's something that you do. That's not something that a pig can do. Now we're at a higher order activity. And Epicurus pointed this out. But every time that people thought about Epicurus, they always sort of like thought of him as Aristippus. And this has been done throughout the ages. So the Epicurean philosophy was supposed to be, you know, just about, you know, sensual pleasure, not about mental pleasure. So Mill is trying to respond to this. And one way that you could respond, if you were Bentham, you could say, well, mental pleasure is just more pleasurable. You know, you get more units of pleasure. Remember, we're always about measuring pleasures and pains. Get more units of pleasure by doing mental activity. And that would have been one way to go. And Bentham himself seems to have had something like that in mind. But maybe that's not the best strategy to take. Because maybe that's not capturing something really essential about us human beings. So what Mill does...
Can I just interject?
Absolutely.
So I have sometimes in my class, if you guys have done the hedonic calculus,
Mm-hmm.
I'll make it like, I'll have the students go through it and then, you know, pick something that's, say, more sensual. I always call this the sex, drugs, and rock and roll problem, but.
Yeah,
So
I usually do books versus beer. But
Yeah, so I would say, like, you know, go through the hedonic calculus and figure out how much pleasure you would get from, say, having a glass of wine or going to a concert or something like that. And we run through all the numbers. The kids have to do the 7 criteria.
Yeah,
And then I'll have a, you know, do the same thing for reading Bentham.
yeah.
And then, you know, inevitably, you know,
He rates
according
pretty
to
low.
Bentham's own philosophy, you should go have a beer instead of read his book, right? And so,
Yeah, actually, that'd be kind of an interesting thing would be, so you guys have read Bentham and you've read Mill. If you were stuck having to read one of them for the next 3 hours, who would you rather read, Bentham or Mill? Style-wise. Who did
it's
you
a
find?
Hobson's choice for them. It's really
Yeah, it can be about pains,
Yeah.
reducing pains, right? I mean, I would think it would be Mill, because Mill doesn't provide you with these interminable lists that seem to go on forever and try to cover every single possibility. I hope that, you know, Mill's at least seemed more interesting to you. And yeah, last class, I give them a worksheet by which we do that. And we looked at some bigger picture issues, drone strikes and the soda ban. But, you know, we've got some ways of doing it for other things. So let's go on to this. So quantitative versus qualitative. When you say quantitative, that's measurable. Everything is comparable, right? When we thought about measuring pleasure by how much you'd be willing to pay for it, dollar amounts. $1 is equivalent to another dollar, right? You can swap them back and forth. $20, you can have a $20 bill, you swap it for 20 singles. Similarly, with pleasures and pains, you could compare them against each other quantitatively by using that hedonic calculus. And you know, we saw there's some problems with this. Some of this seems a little kind of made up from time to time, but you know, you could still do it. There's certain proxies like money that we can use. There's actually fairly sophisticated theories out there that sometimes get used in business for calculating utility. Qualitative, keyword there is quality, right? When you have differences in quality, there are some sorts of breaks. And here's the general, I mean, this doesn't apply to all of our uses of the term quality, but this is what Mill means by it. If you have different qualities, different qualitative levels, you go from this level to this level, no amount of this level is going to get you here. Something has to change. Something has to be fundamentally different. He doesn't actually have this many different levels. He, practically speaking, has 2 levels. I think if we were going to try to make this work, we would have to distinguish probably more levels and get a bit more sophisticated with this than he's doing here. So what are these different levels of pleasures? Well, you know, the pleasures that are at the animal or sensual level. If we're just staying at that level, we can compare them against each other. We can do the hedonic calculus. We can say 1 beer is just as good of a pleasure as 2 cups of coffee, for instance. You know, just based on taste or intoxication. You know, who knows? I mean, I'm kind of making this up as I go along. 1 hour of watching people run back and forth with a ball, doing some sort of game, might be worth 10 boxes of cereal that you like to eat. I don't know. You know, we can go on with these sort of things forever. And that's all at this level because it has to do with the senses, the pleasures that the pet pig could indulge in. But we have higher pleasures, and the reason we have higher pleasures is we have higher faculties. This is what makes us distinctively human. So I'm going to just, we don't have too much time for looking at the passages very closely, but I want to hit on this. He says, human beings have faculties more elevated than the animal appetites, and once made conscious of them, once made conscious, and some people are not yet conscious of these, once made conscious of them, do not regard anything as happiness which does not include their gratification. So here we're at the distinctively human level. We're talking about higher faculties. So what are these? What makes us, I know what Mill's answer is, and we'll look at it in a second. What makes us distinctively human? As opposed to the other animals. What makes you qualitatively better than anything other than a human being? Yeah.
More brains.
Yeah. And so our brains, and it's interesting you say that, because usually when we talk about somebody having brains, what do we mean? We're thinking about the
Intelligence.
Yeah. So he uses the word intellect, and you could use, and we often will say intelligence, and we mean something very similar to that. That isn't it. That's not everything. That's a very important part of it. What else? I mean, dog and cat likes to snuggle with you and get close and all that, but you know, if you're a Mill, you might say that's physical responses. But you know, we form different kinds of relationships, don't we? Our affection can be at a higher level. Mill talks about our imagination and our feelings. He uses the word feeling. And our, what he calls our moral faculty. And what does he mean by our moral faculty? Our sense of right and wrong. You know, we've talked about this many times over the course of the semester. Your dog will never ask itself, am I a good dog? It'll look to you to say, you know, am I a good dog? Meaning, do I get the treat? You know, or do I get sent outside or banished or something like that? But it's never going to actually think to itself, am I a good dog? What does goodness mean in my case? And these sort of things that you guys actually do think about. Whether you think about it, you know, in a very explicit, conscious way or in a sort of muddle your way through it way, that's part of what it means to be human. So having an imagination which allows for creativity. Animals are creative to some degree, but not, I mean, they're not making this sort of stuff, right? That you're about to see in just a moment. Intellect. Animals, you know, they do some problem solving, not the way we do. And these are pleasurable. There are intellectual pleasures. There are pleasures of the imagination. When you're watching a movie, now we have dogs and cats that actually will watch the screen, and they do identify some things as like other animals, and will bark at them or, you know, attentively watch them. But they're not getting, you know, if we're like last night we watched The Minority Report and some of The Sopranos. The dogs are not following the plot lines. They're not deciding whether Tony Soprano made the right choice or the wrong choice at this time, and they're not going to have a conversation about it because they don't have these faculties. We enjoy doing that. I imagine for every one of you, there is some television show or series or something along those lines that you want to know what happens next and you're interested in it and you enjoy finding that out and thinking about it, right? I would say our appreciation of music falls in here. Now here's the problem. Mill often seems to talk as if anything that is based in the senses is merely at this level. So when we think about, I mean, he's okay with music, right? Music, you know, can elevate us because they had this very romantic conception of music going on at the time. I think he would be perfectly willing to say when we're watching, you know, a play, we're engaging in some sort of imaginative or intellectual pleasure. But when it comes to food, it seems like, well, that's just stuff we shovel in our faces, and it can be, you know, the taste can be better or worse, but that's merely at this level, this lower level. It doesn't engage these higher faculties. And every time that I've taught this, I've thought, well, that's kind of weird, you know. And I've been teaching this for a long time, so it wasn't, you know, it wasn't necessarily having the Culinary Institute of America down the road, which really makes the problem pressing. And I would teach this, and I think, well, wait a second, you know, couldn't food involve higher pleasures? You know, and if we think about other analogs, let's say we take, for example, sexuality. Now, if you're just hooking up with somebody for the night, just to have sex, that probably is just at this level, right? I mean, there are some people, I suppose, who, you know, make some sort of big game out of it. You know, they're some sort of connoisseurs or something like that. You know, like you can read these novels, like Dangerous Liaisons, where people are, you know, doing all this arrangement. But that puts it up at a higher level. It becomes a game for them. And even that is kind of, you know, lacking in what's available to us in terms of pleasure. If you want to talk about intimacy in a relationship, that's not at this level. That's a good. That's at a much higher level. One other concept that's really important before we go on to the sort of practical, experiential demonstration. Who's the person who gets to decide this? Mill talks about somebody being a judge. And I like the word ideal judge for this. This is a person who has thoroughly experienced both levels of whatever's being compared. They have to not only experience the higher level, but the lower level. They have to experience the higher level just as much as the lower level, but they have to also have experienced the lower level. So you could not be a prude. You could not have lived a life that's solely dedicated to these higher things, and you've never actually indulged yourself in just sheer sensual pleasure, having a beer just for the sake of tasting a beer, you know, any of these sorts of things, in order to be able to compare them against each other. But Mill says once you do, once you actually have enough experience in this sort of stuff, it doesn't matter how much of the lower pleasure is offered, you'll pass it up for a higher pleasure. You'll say, nah, this is not good enough, I need this. Once you've actually experienced it. This is one of the big problems, though. In his time, as well as in our time, many people don't really experience these. They don't get to be brought in contact with these. In his time, it was in large part because of social conditions. In our time, that's still an issue, but not as big of an issue. And we got to think about why it is that we don't, why we don't know these higher pleasures or appreciate these higher pleasures as much as we could. Now, when it comes to food, we have the culinary right down the road. And what are they doing there? If it's only about this stuff, if it's only this lower level of pleasure, how can there be an entire institution devoted to this that, you know, ties in all these other studies with the production and consumption of food? So this is where I'm going to actually leave off, and Chef Mattel is going to take over. And
So, I would argue that if food was not a higher pleasure, the CIA would not even exist, because food is really attainable by people in other ways. You could get food, especially here in this country. Some people do worldwide, you know, in other countries struggle to get food. And that's when I think eating in that case is not pleasurable maybe at all. And it kind of, I think, in a sense, correlates a little bit to the hierarchy of needs. If you don't have any food, I don't know if you're going to eat, no matter what it is you're eating, even if it is, we would think it's pleasurable, I don't know if you're going to find pleasure in it, because you're so kind of stressed out of maybe where your next meal is going to come from, that even if it tastes good, that might not even be what registers in your head at the time. So you're eating strictly for subsistence. But I can tell you that I believe food, and I think you probably will all agree, does represent higher pleasures and could stimulate a lot of intellectual power and thought and debate. And I'm going to try to illustrate that a little bit with some food comparisons. But what I do want to say is, I believe. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. I think I might qualify at this point in my career as an ideal judge, because I not only experience food on such a basic level, but also at the higher levels. In fact, a week from tomorrow, I'm taking my wife to dinner in New York City, and I'm going to spend $1,000 for the two of us to eat dinner. And I know people there, but this restaurant's called Per Se. And I am going there to really experience very, 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 maybe almost the highest pleasures attainable by someone when it comes to food. And the reason why I could get even more pleasure out of it is because I understand it. But that said, I, being an ideal judge, I get pleasure from food that other people are eating just for subsistence. Maybe when I travel. I'll give you an example. When I was in Thailand, I ate some street food, and I got high pleasure from eating jasmine rice there, where I don't think the populace where I was getting too much pleasure. That was more of a staple, but the fact that I understood and I had pre-knowledge of the culture and what that represented and why it was jasmine rice and the grain of the rice and how it was cooked and some of the aromatics that were infused into the rice, I got very stimulated just by eating a little bit of jasmine rice. So I think it also varies based on individuals and individual experience and what culture you're coming from. But I would definitely argue that food represents high pleasure many, many times. So let's do a little bit of a comparison, and maybe we could generate some conversation. And we're going to start with the nuts. I'm going to pass some of these around too. Do you eat in the morning? Something?
Yeah, I think for many of our students, this is going to be their first meal of the day.
First meal of the day? Well, what's nutritional about nuts? What nutrition do you have? What components you have in there that are healthy? Does anybody know? What do you think? Are they healthy, nuts? Huh? Maybe not with all the salt on it, but why are they healthy? Well, they're a pretty good source of protein. They have often monounsaturated fats that are not really bad for you, that are good, right? Some fiber. They're not unhealthy. In fact, they're probably a good snack because they're low carbs, right? And they fill you up because they're a higher level of protein. So I try to snack on nuts. Now, obviously, you could look at me and say, this guy cheats. I definitely cheat along the way. But what I'd like you to do, and what we have there is, try the peanuts first. Those are Planters dry roasted peanuts. Anything special about them? Unless you have peanut allergy, don't please eat them. Anything special about them? Do you get pleasure by eating them? Or is it just, they taste okay, but it's like very pedestrian, no? Yes?
Yeah.
Now try the other nuts and tell me what you sense. Are they good? What makes them good?
It has sort of, well, not the peanuts, the other ones have more of a foreign taste. It's a spice. It reminds me of Indian culture.
A foreign taste reminds her, what's your name?
Ariel.
Ariel? Reminds Ariel of an Indian culture. So how about anybody else? What else do you notice eating those? Ariel woke up when she ate those and got a little excited about that. Not when she was eating the peanuts, not at the prospect of eating peanuts, but of eating those mixed nuts. What else do you notice about those nuts?
Well, I think it's just because there's like, I'm so used to the other regular nuts that when I tasted that, like flavor pop, so it was different.
The
so.
flavor popped, it was different, so it sparked your curiosity. Did you find yourself saying, oh, what's in there? Did you find yourself trying to identify what nut is what? Did you find yourself thinking globally? You did. About another culture. What's in it? Did anybody try to distinguish anything about the spices themselves? Yes or no? Did anybody think that, well, what is it that I'm tasting? It's basically curry powder, but curry powder is a mixture of spices, including turmeric, coriander, cumin, fenugreek, right? Star anise, possibly. So it's all these mixtures of spices that come together and form this complex, yes, married kind of flavor. So I think that example alone just kind of brought it up to a higher level. Because you tried to, analyze it, you make global references, you understood that this represented something cultural or cross-cultural, right? What kind of nuts are in there?
Cashews.
Cashews. What else?
I'm afraid to guess again.
No.
Are there hazelnuts in there?
Hazelnuts, or filberts as they're sometimes called, which are domestic. Cashews come from rainforest. There's macadamia nuts in there that come from these trees indigenous of Australia, but often grown in Hawaii, right? There's almonds, California almonds, but they grow in pretty much, like the Mediterranean, Middle East. But what you also have represented in that little cup is food globalization. Those products are coming from everywhere, and you have a contrast of textures. Now, there's a lot to think about there. There's a lot that we just talked about with those simple little curried nuts. But let me ask you something. Don't you have, if you went to a restaurant and you had a cocktail at the bar, and instead of the peanuts that you find at a bar often, while you're waiting for your table, there were those curry mixed nuts, would you also have a higher perception of value? Would you think of the establishment now in a different light? So, I mean, it is really, food is affecting you in many, many different ways. The second example we have here, we have 2 chilled soups. These are not vegetarian. They are made, both of them have a little chicken stock in them. So just to let you know if you're and there's a little dairy as well. So just to let you know. Other than that, there's no pork products, there's no other animal products in there. But I'm not going to tell you what the garnish one is, but just, and I'm sorry I keep
That's
moving
okay.
around. But visually, you see that they're different. You have this white liquid, and then you have a liquid that has some visual appeal. I mean, granted, it would be a lot nicer looking if it was in a ceramic bowl and, a little cleaned up, but you get the drift, right? So, which one? They're both pretty similar color. When you looked at them, did you automatically gravitate towards the garnish one? And what did you start to think about? What were you thinking?
It's a cool green color.
Well, what else did you think about that? Did you think about what those things were?
Yes.
Do you need an explanation?
Yes.
Do you?
No.
Do you
I don't know
want
what that
one?
green stuff is.
What's
I don't
that?
know what the green liquid is.
I'll tell you in a bit.
Okay.
But I'd like you to taste the white one first.
I think we both.
Oh, you did? Okay, taste the white one first. Are you gonna have it?
Afterwards.
And tell me what you think. Is it good? This is a preparation that dates back to Mill's time. So this could be honestly what Mill ate at some point. What do you think it is?
Tastes like potato leek something.
That's what it's called vichyssoise, which is potato leek soup, a chilled potato and leek soup. So you have onion flavor, but it's more or less pretty, you liked it a lot, I could say. It pretty much has a neutral flavor. It's not that descript, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's tasty enough. When you eat that, is that sort of like, would you say more about low pleasure? I mean, it feels good. What do you think?
I think it complements well with the peanuts. So.
Okay, we'll start garnishing. But what do you think? Is it high pleasure, or you really, or it's kind of singular in flavor?
It's interesting.
It's interesting, but I would say once you understand a little more about food, this would be something that is good, and you think it tastes pretty good, but it's more or less substance. I mean, it's not something you have on a regular basis, but quite frankly, if you lived in an area where, you know, you grew only potatoes and onions, you probably would have this a lot. This would be your equivalent of porridge or something that, you know, would become a staple. So it would be really substance or very low pleasure. Now, if you taste the other one, you're expecting that it's the same with garnish, right? It looks almost the same, but with garnish. But it's not. So, what is your brain telling you here? Anything? Do you have any questions? Besides what's the green stuff?
It's good.
Do you? Any questions?
I think the question is the same for a lot of us, what is the green stuff?
The green stuff is chive oil. So it's French olive oil, mind you, French extra virgin olive oil, infused with fresh chives. And then it's allowed to just decant and strain out. So all the pulp stays behind, and some of the essential oils from the chives are kind of emulsified. But what's the base? What's the soup there? It doesn't taste like the potato leek, right? I don't think any of you will be able to identify it. Who could identify what that is? No, right? So that really is making you think. What, at least it would for me. What is it? What is it? I need to know. I need to know, because I don't eat food just for some. Oh no, that's not true. I'll go home, you know, hungry one night after a couple of beers and throw down a frozen taco, you know, something like that. I mean, that's substance. But most of the time, I'm interested in everything I'm eating, and I'm dissecting it. And actually trying to definitely go to higher pleasures, higher intellect, and incorporating everything here. Intellect, imagination, feeling, and moral faculties as well. And let me tell you how that applies, and then I'll tell you what the rest of it is. Intellect goes back to what you were saying, Ariel, in my opinion. What is this? What culture is it from? I'm trying to learn from my food experience. Feeling, or imagination, a lot of times we look at food, the presentation, and we try to manipulate the presentation and create something that's very artistic, and something that transforms the food into something that stimulates the imagination, a presentation that stimulates the imagination. Feeling, think about comfort food. Think about that cold winter day where you go home and you have like a nice stew or a soup, or you're kind of sick and you have chicken soup. I mean, you're getting definitely feelings out of that. Feelings of comfort, soothing, right? And moral faculty, well, we talked a little bit about that earlier. Where is this food coming from? Who does it impact? I think about that. I think about if I'm buying asparagus in February, I think about, well, where's that coming from? Who's it impacting? A lot of our students take some pretty radical stands when it comes to food issues, like GMOs, genetically modified organisms, or engineering, local versus food that's transported with what they feel is a large global impact, organic versus conventional. All these things go through your mind, but it's very complicated. I mean, you could say, oh, we don't want genetically engineered food, but with this growing population that's scheduled to reach, 10 billion really soon, how are we going to feed the world? Well, we have enough food, but can we distribute it? Is it better to genetically engineer corn so we could grow it in the desert? I'm not sure what the answer is. When it comes to food, my example of asparagus, being brought up from Peru in the winter here. If you say, no, we're going to just eat asparagus in May and June when it's local here, that's all well and good. But what happens to the farmers in Peru? Do they now grow something illicit because their economy depends so much on that agricultural product? I'm not sure. I'm just saying it's pretty complicated, and every time I make a food choice, I think of these things. What you're eating is a puree. It's made in the same technique as the potato leek soup, but it's made with Jerusalem artichokes or sunchokes. Anybody ever have that?
Just now.
Just now. And then there are, you know, regular artichokes, globe artichokes?
Yeah.
Those I cleaned, shaved on a slicer, and deep fried them as a garnish. Now, Jerusalem artichokes, just so that you know, are tubers that are not related to artichokes. They're actually related to sunflowers. And they grow locally. You could, I mean, I grow them at home. You plant them, they just start growing and growing. And you weed them out a little bit to get them to grow to a edible point, but they're a tuber. You know, a tuber like a potato, kind of starchy and all. But they have, if you notice, they have a very distinct flavor. And if you're not used to that, that's a food I think that you'd say, well, what the hell is this, you know? What is it? It's not easily identifiable unless somebody teaches you. And then you know, like I just taught you, it's a member of the sunflower family. You could grow it here. It's an indigenous product. There's so much to know behind it that as humans, we can process. As animals, we're much less discriminate about food. But they do make choices, right? Your dogs and cats won't eat everything. Even if it's safe, they might not eat everything. They do make choices, but not based on the same, not based on pleasure. Based on, I think, I'm not a dog, hopefully, maybe in the past life, or future life, hopefully. I think it's good life, actually. But, I mean, I don't think they're really getting pleasure. They're eating because they know that they need to eat. Where's their next meal going to come from? I have a very nervous cat that just constantly wants to eat because I think she's afraid that food's going to run out. So that's why they're eating. I'm not eating that way. People do eat that way globally sometimes, though, also. So it all depends on your socioeconomic situation. Questions? Anything to go along with that? No? Am I catching the essence of this?
You are, yeah.
Do you think?
Yeah. What do you think, Joe?
I think so. You know, as we just like, there's certain like, I'm going to use. There's certain stories that we connect with food that's not happening on the animal level. And I don't mean stories in the sense that, you know, they're made up or something, but some of the connections might be like intellectual, so that if I'm eating the Jerusalem artichoke, I know that it's, you know, a member of the sunflower family or what have you. But there's also even like, just say, cultural connections or familial connections.
Yes.
And, you know, like, so, you know, I have a dog, and, you know, I'm reading the package on the dog food, you know, whatever origin dog food we're buying, and I'm from Canada, and it comes from Canada. I'm making all these connections, but to be honest, my dog doesn't give a rat's ass where this food's coming from. And so there's that, you know, if the idea then is connecting up what Greg is talking about, layered on top of just the pure physical chewing and the digesting and the tasting of the food, there's this kind of like, say, cerebral aspect to it as well, such that we can talk about a higher pleasure, you know, in Mill's sense, of a higher pleasure of eating, as opposed to looking at it in utilitarian terms, like in the bad sense of utility, right? But, yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
And like I said in the beginning, the CIA would not exist if not for food being pleasurable. Because although you could argue that there are, especially when it comes to, we divide food service into commercial and non-commercial. Here at Marist, you have food service, right? You have cafeterias, other types of dining, catering that goes on. This is non-commercial type food service because the primary business of Marist is education, but yet food is a necessary function. You have to have food here. It's because we need food. So yes, there is non-commercial food service, But would you be happy if there was a connection? I mean, this direct definition that non-commercial food service was utilitarian and just gave you, you know, all you had to eat down there was basically food that would keep you going and give you energy. Don't you want variety? Don't you want interesting food? Don't you want rotating menus? Don't you get pissed all the time at the food service and say, hey man, you know this is terrible, or can't you just change this up? Or I'm sick of Lucky Charms, can you get Golden Grahams? Who knows? I mean,
Yeah.
I've heard it all, right? So even in a non-commercial sense, when food is not the primary business, like a restaurant or food service at a hotel or a banquet hall, people want variety and want it to be a higher pleasure.
Can you tell them a little bit about how culinary students are trained to become ideal judges?
Yeah, you know, that was interesting because I was thinking about that. And I was thinking that, actually, I wrote down a note about that. Let me just pull that out. Because I kind of thought that I kind of thought of prospective students are a bad judge. And I thought that current students are kind of a bad judge, but that faculty and industry leaders are a good judge. But then the ideal judge would be somebody who actually went through that whole kind of range. But I think that the students, through palate development that you mentioned, and education in terms of the cultures and the information about agriculture and ingredients and all that, they become a good judge. And they become a good judge when they really experience low pleasure food. And then they're able to elevate that food into kind of a higher realm. I'll give you an example. Rice we talked about. You could have steamed rice, or you could have risotto with fontina cheese, pancetta, and Brussels sprouts leaves, you know, with really unbelievable aged cheese grated on top, made really well. I mean, it's still a dull bowl of rice, but I'll pay $30. I know what it costs, and it doesn't cost a lot to put that on the plate. But I, as a professional, will pay $30 for that without blinking an eye if it's made correctly, because I'm paying for the care and the love and the skill that went into that. But I think that's kind of what happens to students. And then only through experience and learning, what happens is when you're a culinary student, you learn how to prepare all these preparations, baking, culinary, it depends what you do. You learn the business behind it. But it's not until you're doing these tasks daily, repetitively, that you start to recognize the little nuances that are involved. And I think it's being able to understand the properties and how things react and actually anticipate how food is evolving either in the plate, on the pot, that makes you, you know, a better judge, quite honestly.
How long do you think it takes I mean, you have the 2-year program and the 4-year program. How long do you think it takes to really become a great judge of food
I think
pleasures?
it varies depending on what you're coming in with, and then what your experience is after, how much of an immersion experience you have. And then if it's really focused or restricted but yet immersed, yes, you may be an ideal judge in some areas but not overall. So I think if you're talking about being an ideal judge in a general sense, it probably takes longer because it's much broader and you have to experience so much more. But I think that somebody could become an ideal judge if they're focused on something specific or something just less broad.
Mm-hmm.
Like if somebody just, for instance, there's a film right now called, it's sort of a documentary. I didn't see it, but I know of it. Has anybody seen Jiro Dreams of Sushi?
I know I haven't seen it. I know the movie.
You've seen it?
No, top movie in our Netflix queue.
Yeah. So Jiro Dreams of Sushi, this guy Jiro in Tokyo evidently, has a little sushi shop that's near a train station, and it's considered
A mecca.
Yes, like the sushi of all sushis. You go there, you never want to eat it again. I believe that. But that's all this guy has done. His whole life is devoted to sushi and his family. So he is the ideal judge for sushi. Ask him to make meatloaf, it's going to be challenging, right? So I think, it all depends. How long it would take depends on where you're focusing.
Okay.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah.
By the way, I ate sushi at 6 o'clock in the morning at the Tsukiji Fish Market in Tokyo about 10 years ago. And when I love sushi and sashimi. You guys? Yes? And when I came back here to the States, I could not eat it for a year. Because I seek out optimum food experiences. Optimum. Like when I was in Mexico City, I'm just eating at I'm trying to find these little hole-in-walls where I could get the best chicharron, the best tacos al pastor. When I'm in Puerto Rico, I'm down at Piñones, this little area that's all street food, trying to get the best bacalaíto and alcapurria, and you know what I'm saying? And everywhere I go, I'm seeking out that optimum food experience, which most people might see it at a lower level. There. People that are used to it. But I see it as the pinnacle, the highest level. Because I continually want to build up my expertise, right? That I seek out those experiences, learn everything there is. What's the history behind that? There's so much history in all this food. I just want to know about it. I have a book called The Literary Gourmet. The first recipe from Abraham's time, like Jacob and Esau, and way, way back in the Bible, is this potage of red lentils that has water, red lentils, and a lamb bone in it. And to me, I would love to have that prepared for me. That would give me so much stimulation. Appeal to my highest senses. That I could experience a dish from biblical times in the most authentic way. I know I get a little into it. I'm going to chill, man. I know it's Friday, it's spring break. Anything else? Any other comments? What about your food experiences? Do you anybody share any of that experience? What have you experienced?
I mean, not particularly to mine, but definitely this time like this food awesome. Wherever I got. When you travel, you have to try new food.
Right.
Those don't I'll eat anything. I'll try anything.
And do you have it categorized in any way, or it could just happen, right?
It just happened, yeah. 'Cause, I mean, I don't know food the way you do, so it's not as easy for me to just identify it in that way.
Right, but even so, there are probably times where unexpectedly, something is, and this might not even be completely conscious, but something might taste so good and be complex enough that subconsciously you're regarding all of these things, cultural, what is in there, what's this contrast of texture, and it's higher levels of pleasure. And it's interesting how as we get older and certain physiological changes happen, how pleasure is ranked differently. Quite honestly, when I was your age, sex was number one. My greatest pleasure, my greatest goal. It is now sleep. Okay? So sleep, if I could get a good night's sleep, I'll pass sex up. No problem. At your age, that would never happen. I could be up 48 hours, I would never turn it down. And I got it, and I thought about where I was getting it next, just soon after. So I think where we find these highest pleasures do shift along the way. Also, yes.
It may not be the same, but I'm just thinking of children and how they're educated, and so part of it is, so all of you guys here too, right? You would have done music appreciation classes, right? So when you're little kids, they expose you to classical music, and it may just sound like, you know, noise or whatever, or art movements and impressionism, but there's not really an equivalent for food, right? So, you know, my children will be taught nutrition, but, you know, they're not taught to, say, discriminate between like a good tomato and a bad tomato or anything like that. So it's something too where, like, going back to that line from Mill where this happens when you're made conscious of them, it seems that oftentimes in our society we're not made conscious of these things, or, you know, unless it's done kind of informally, but there's not, say, like a kind of emphasis in our society towards, you know, what constitutes, you know, not necessarily like what's like a nutritious food, but, you know, what constitutes a good salad in the aesthetic sense, or what constitutes a good burger. You know,
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. And you can have it all. You don't, I mean, you're not going to give up the nutrition.
No,
if you're,
and oftentimes they probably go together, right? There
Yes,
might be a
they
thing
do.
where, you know, you can even make an argument that if you just teach nutrition on that kind of level, you know, something could be nutritious but taste like crap. And so, but, you know, like if it's a case where you're getting at the nutrition through the taste of the food, you know, it might be more effective pedagogically to maybe expose kids to delicious foods that happen to be nutritious, rather than just teach them nutrition and then they're just like, well, this is all bad.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's right. And that's where I think there are a lot of efforts emerging to not only educate young people, younger than you, about nutritional foods, what's nutrition, but how to make them either delicious or actually train school food service providers on how to make it delicious.
Yeah, there we're actually getting to like the part of, you know, Mill about so many people are deprived of the chance to experience the higher pleasures. If you think about, we do teach about food in our elementary schools, but we teach in a very negative way by giving them, in a lot of cases, you know, pretty bad food.
Yeah.
You know, and we say, well, this is it, you know. And I remember when I was a kid, it was pizza burgers and pizzas. Those were the two greatest things, you know.
Yeah.
Instead of having the Salisbury steak that we would get, that was, you know, pretty awful. And, you know, I look at the stuff that we would eat. That pizza, that was not good pizza.
No.
But, you know, for us, that was as good as it was going to get. And so, because we didn't know any better, you know.
Right.
There wasn't anything fresh.
But even so, I think you were eating on much of a lower pleasure.
Exactly, yeah.
No matter what, even if you didn't know better, if it's not good, it's low pleasure.
Yeah.
Even if it's the best available. But when you do have the elevation, that distinguishes the lower and higher pleasure. So that's an interesting, I think, thought too. But when it comes to teaching our kids now, even if they're not getting this at home, I still think in school, if they're exposed to more nutritious foods, they're going to pick up some of these habits, or at least have more to think about and build on their reasoning skills when it comes to food choices. I think it's extremely important that we keep moving in that direction. Even at the CIA, we have a health and wellness initiative. We're trying, even in our courses, to incorporate more whole grains, lots more plant-based food, shrink portions of protein. You know, it's a problem. It's a problem out there. And I know I overindulge. I take in too many, and I exercise. I exercise a lot. So I have endurance. I mean, I could go and do a 40-mile bike ride or whatever, without a problem. It's just that I overindulge. There's too much opportunity for me to consume. And I have to do it for evaluation purposes as well.
Give them an idea about how much tasting students would be doing at the culinary.
Well, you know, we encourage them to taste more than often they do. I mean, you guys, you know, young people, their taste buds are more sensitive. As we get older, our taste kind of gets a little, we lose taste buds and our taste changes. I mean, I crave bitter. How many of you like really bitter, like broccoli rabe? I didn't like this when I was your age at all, but I crave that now. And that's just a change. I crave less sweets, you know, and much more acidic food. So, you know, those things do change, and so the students have definitely more sensitized palates. So a lot of times they are leery to taste everything, but that's such a big part of the process, the educational process. And I've even been working with, we have kosher students that can't taste anything because we're not kosher, we don't have kosher facilities. And what we've tried to do with them, I've gotten them pots. And I've worked on a program where they could cook their own food, so this way they could simulate what they're learning in the classroom and be able to taste it, even if they're making it, but they have a point of comparison, which is really key. We have students with allergies, and we have to hold them still accountable for in the same standards as other students when it comes to assessment of taste or balance or contrast. We're always looking to balance food on a plate. Contrast colors, textures, mouthfeel, right? And contrast the basic taste, sweet, bitter, sour, salty, and umami. You guys know umami at all? Anybody ever hear of umami? It's kind of the savory taste of protein. It's mostly kind of illustrated if you eat like shiitake mushrooms or even ketchup and tomatoes, or that taste of like grilled steak. It's a little less tangible per se, but it is definitely there. It's actually MSG. You know MSG, monosodium glutamate? That is concentrated umami. And I'm not condoning that you eat that or anything, but there's a lot of glutamates or related compounds in naturally occurring foods. In fact, monosodium glutamate is a natural derived product. I mean, it's refined from sugar beets or other plant products. So it's not as bad as people really think it is, but any other questions or any curiosities about food or anything? Yes.
It can be totally unrelated, but I mean to say this or ask actually from the start when you were talking about the cat and how it's eating good for sustenance. Your cat eats crazy, like it's not gonna have another meal for days. My cat has been like that since he was born.
Yeah, mine too.
He's about 2 years old now, and he still runs and dogs the whole plate of
I
food.
know.
It's 2 bowls, but he dogs both of them. Don't know why. We've been doing that since birth, but we feed him every few hours. It's not like we're starving.
Yeah, I know.
It's like we leave food there because we're leaving for the day, and before we even get out the door, he's already done with it.
Yeah, I know. Evidently, there's some cats like that. And I have one that does the same thing. She's like a dog. She don't go anywhere. She follows my father-in-law through the garden. It's like, she's kind of a dog in a cat's body. But it's funny you were making these comparisons, Greg. I always say it's about, capability. And I don't think we also have unlimited capability. I think that we're restricted as organisms too.
Yeah.
With comprehension or even the ability to have certain pleasures. I mean, we're probably restricted in some way. Just we might be the one life form here on Earth that could reason and change and affect so much change around us and use resources way too fast, but. I do think we have some limitations too, even when it comes to creativity and some of the senses as well. I mean, look at how it's unfortunate, for example, that a dog does not have the ability to be more selective when it comes to foods, because I think they have such a greater sense of smell.
Yeah.
That they would actually probably really enjoy food a lot more. They could taste it better, smell it better, but they don't have the brain power to make those choices.
Yeah.
I have a story, but just in terms of, so I have chickens, and they're totally they'll eat anything, but I'm on a chicken blog, so like there's a chicken discussion group, and there was a woman who was making homemade food for her chickens. I just kind of give them the pellets I buy from the agricultural supply store. But she got rid of her chickens because she would make them this kale salad or whatever, And the chicken, they'll poop on their food. They have no, and they'll just keep on eating it. And it so disgusted her that she went to the lengths to make this homemade food, and she thought the chickens were making like a statement that this is, and she says, I'm not keeping, it's totally disgusting. But it's something like, it's lower than dogs or whatever, but you just kind of see where they're just eating through pure sustenance. Like there's no, I'm not sure if they're discriminating anything because, they're chickens. They're,
Right.
Yeah.
But we benefit sometimes because chickens that have a diverse diet, their eggs taste so much better than
Right. So my chicken's free range or whatever.
Yes.
So the yolks are, as orange as
and
orange
it's
can be.
delicious.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is something because I get my neighbor has a farm with chickens, and I get fresh eggs, geese eggs, duck eggs, chicken eggs. I eat them all, right? Even my 11-year-old son will eat goose eggs. Really good. Makes great creme brulee. The yolks, by the way, best creme brulee ever. But when I get these eggs fresh, if I cook one of these eggs just in a tiny bit of butter, just with salt and pepper, I get more pleasure out of eating that than I would like some kind of fancy meal. That really gives me pleasure because I know what utilitarian eggs are.
Yeah.
And I know what they are. I've eaten them. I've used them. They're so important in cooking and baking. I mean, eggs. They do everything. They're the most amazing food. But when I have these eggs that have so much flavor, subtle flavors, it really, really satisfies me. I mean, I celebrate that meal. You guys think I'm crazy. I don't blame you.
Any other questions for Chef Mattel? Let's give him a hand nod.